Hi, I'm Steve Rohde, the Director of the Center for Urban Sustainability at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. The Center is pleased to host the March 2017 session of the Sustainability Leadership Presentation Series. Today's presenter is Michael Helgerson, a Transportation and Data Manager at the Metropolitan Area Planning Agency, or MAPA, which is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, for the Omaha Council Bluffs region. In this role, Mike leads the transportation planning process for the three-county region, which includes Douglas and Sarpy counties in Nebraska and an urbanized portion of Potawatomi County in Iowa. Michael is currently leading the development of MAPA's 2050 Long-Range Transportation Plan, an effort that is tying the Heartland 2050 regional vision to the region's transportation planning process. In addition to these roles at MAPA, Mike has served as a regional active transportation coordinator for the City of Omaha, advising on the development of the Complete Streets Design Manual and incorporation recommendations for MAPA's Regional Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan. Mike received his Bachelor of Science in Community and Regional Planning from Iowa State University and his Master of Public Administration from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Today's presentation is entitled Energy Efficiency in Transportation, Reducing the Impacts of Our Mobility. Thanks, Tom.
Okay. We'll get rid of this gray box here. So hopefully that's out of the way now. Well, good afternoon. Thanks for everybody for coming out to UNO today, and thanks for everybody for tuning in online. As it was noted, my presentation today is entitled Energy Efficiency in Transportation. So I wanted to take a little bit of a different perspective on kind of how we might look at some of the transportation planning decisions that we make, how we look at transportation in terms of what it does in communities and all the impacts that it has kind of outside the realm of just transportation itself. As it was noted, I'm Mike Helgerson, and I work for MAPA. If you haven't heard of MAPA, we do a lot of transportation planning within the Omaha Council Bluffs region. And more recently, make sure we're in the slide deck here, through our Heartland 2050 process, we've actually been looking out to do a lot of community engagement, some planning, and looking at land use and transportation in the 8-county MSA. So in Nebraska, that includes Washington County, Douglas County, Sarpy County, Cass County, and Saunders County, and in Iowa, it's Harrison, Potawatomi, and Mills County. So this is really kind of an unprecedented planning effort for the Omaha area. And we're really looking to do things around the idea of systems thinking, that all these systems of our infrastructure, of our land use decisions are all interconnected. And so in my role, I work on some of the transportation planning projects. So some of the things that we've worked on recently include the Heartland Connections Regional Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan that looked for a number of kind of regional routes through the Omaha Council Bluffs metro area, and the Regional Transit Vision. That was basically a feasibility study that we did in partnership with Metro Transit to look at how transit service can be expanded in the Omaha metro as well. So as an MPO, if you're not familiar with MPOs, they exist in every region, over 50,000 in population. And all that money that you pay at the pump, that is the federal gas tax that goes into the Housing Trust Fund, that's collected in our region. We get about 95 to 99% of that back as transportation funds. As the MPO, we're actually responsible for helping facilitate the conversation about what that funding should be used for. So on an annual basis, it's about $14 to $15 million a year. So not a lot of money, but enough that we can actually make a difference. So I like to say that we're a standing forum for transportation decision making. Our members are local communities, cities, counties, agencies like Metro Transit and others that do provide transportation services. So with Heartland 2050, kind of the fundamental question that we are looking to answer, and the link I want to make to the transportation planning process that I'm going to talk about today, is thinking about how we grow responsibly, and then also ensure that we're maintaining a high quality of life in a lot of different areas just beyond transportation itself. So in kind of the description for this event and kind of the brief abstract, if you will, of what I presented, there were three main questions that I wanted to kind of cover in various ways. One is, what can we do to promote energy efficiency and energy conservation in the way we move around our community? And also looking at a little bit, what are some of the trends around alternative fuels, including electric vehicles? And then also, what can we expect from future technologies around autonomous vehicles and other things? This is probably the question I get asked on a daily basis these days, is what are autonomous vehicles going to do? And what impact are they going to have on our communities? So we'll cover that kind of at the end today as well. So energy efficiency as a lens is a little bit different, but I thought in terms of sustainability, it's a really good way of looking at some of the different things that impact transportation planning, transportation systems, and really our ability to invest in transportation as communities and as a nation. And so mode choice, this is kind of the jargony term for basically how do we choose to get around? Are we walking to some of our daily needs? Do we bike to work? Do we ride the bus to maybe do shopping, or do we drive for most of our needs? And so this mode choice has a lot of impact on the amount of energy that we're consuming, and it really impacts other things like how we develop as a community as well. And then finally, my field, my realm is really around transportation investment. So what can public agencies do? What maybe are some of the issues that we should be thinking about in terms of how we've invested in the past, what we need to be investing in the future, and where some of the benefits may lie. And what would a sustainability presentation be without this? I'm just going to be making reference to some of these, the kind of the three pillars of sustainability, both the economic, the environmental, and the equity piece, the social performance, the people, planet, and profit aspects of sustainability will be kind of covered throughout as well. So I'm going to start with some of these issues that you might think of first when I talk about fuel energy efficiency, which might be fuel economy. The corporate average fuel efficiency guidelines that were instituted back in 1975 have had a tremendous impact on the amount of gas that has been consumed by light-duty trucks and personal automobiles over the last 40 to 50 years. And so, there were new standards issued under the Obama administration that even tightened it down even further, with the second part of the emission standards being covering vehicles from 2017 to 2025. And as you can see, I'll resist the urge to point to the screen as there's people on the web. The new standards between 2011 and 2016 projected out reduce our reliance on gasoline to move our vehicles a tremendous amount below the baseline from the 1978 to 2010 standards. And the new standards for the more recent vehicles after 2025 are going to do that even more. And so we can see that this is really, even as traffic increases, as the number of vehicles continue to increase, we're going to be consuming less fuel based around fuel efficiency. So this is a tremendously good thing in terms of the environment, because we know that fossil fuel consumption is not the best thing for us to be doing, and we'll cover that a little bit more as well. At the same time, you may think about traffic growth, and this is a kind of one sample of traffic information from about 1995 to 2015. And what you can see is that generally, and if we extended this back out to the 1970s, it was almost a nice slope upward, almost without any sort of discontinuation. But if we started to look in terms of 2006 and in the years kind of right before the Great Recession, we started to see it level out. But the way that the traditional transportation planning process has been done, and the way that we look at it as transportation planners and transportation engineers, is we never assume it's going to go down. That never happens. And so if we were to do any projections from that point, it would look a lot like that. But what we can see, and this, I should note that this leads to such characterizations from our former transportation secretary that Omaha is going to be the next Los Angeles. And so this is a paradigm that I think kind of dictates how we think about traffic and how we think about transportation investments. Because there's a certain approach to fixing this problem. Transportation or traffic's going to grow kind of continually forever. We have to think about the capacity of our roadways and how we need to be investing in it. Those are very expensive fixes. But what we can see is over the last 10 years, the average growth has been upward, but relatively flat. And so what are we looking to do in this kind of space, where maybe certain corridors are experiencing a high amount of growth, but other corridors are not? And what are some of the tools that we can look to maximize the investment that we've already made as a community in our roadway system, and not kind of continually chasing what we would call capacity and building roads that are instantly filled up over time? And the city of Omaha, as kind of a local example, has done a lot in this space. And back in 2013, they passed what's called the Signal System Master Plan, which is about a 10-year, $30 to $50 million, depending on when they get a chance to actually implement it, a plan to connect almost all the traffic signals in the city of Omaha and make many adaptive corridors. So in terms of adaptive corridors, that means, if in the morning there's a neighborhood and there's a traffic signal and everybody wants to turn left, that in that morning time, there's probably going to be more time of that traffic signal, more green time given to that movement. so that there are fewer people waiting and stuck in their cars, sitting in traffic and what we would characterize as delay, which is basically idling in your car. And so these types of technology investments can really improve the efficiency of the transportation system, reduce some of the impacts that we might see from cars themselves, because our goal is to have 10% of people not using cars for daily trips by the year 2040. We're currently around 2 to 4%, depending on how you measure it. So that's a tremendous amount of change, but that still leaves 90% of people to move around the community in their cars, and it would be a transformational change. So for vehicles, traffic signals are a great way of sort of maximizing the investment that we've already made in the roadway, helping kind of smooth things out and helping the traffic that will be there that we anticipate will grow over time to move efficiently throughout the system. And then there's also other pieces of this that we would kind of characterize in terms of intelligent transportation systems, really technology that helps us use what we have today in better ways. And this includes vehicle to infrastructure communication. So where you may hear about connected vehicles in the news quite a bit these days, and there's actually technologies that communities can put on the side of the road so that they can speak to these vehicles and basically let them know where they are, what they should be anticipating, and really kind of connect the vehicles to the infrastructure themselves. And so this is something that you're probably going to see over the next probably decade or two, really getting rolled out in a number of communities as well. So cars, this is probably the best way that we have. We know capacity in general, adding capacity doesn't work. There's diminishing returns. But this is a good way of kind of maximizing the investment that we've already made as a community in the roadway and really getting the most out of it that we can. So in terms of electric vehicles, the cost of lithium-ion batteries has just plummeted over the last decade. And this has really contributed to the rise of affordable electric vehicles being available for consumers, because I think this chart here notes that a third of the cost of an EV is generally in the batteries. And so as those batteries become more efficient, as they're more available, we were seeing tremendous growth in EVs. You'll note that it's only down here today. But the anticipated growth over time as the technology continues to be refined is significant as well. And so what we can see is that, an important piece of this is what infrastructure is available. And so in Iowa and Nebraska, you can see there's 137 public charging stations for people in the state of Nebraska. This includes things like truck stops and other places, and 204 in Iowa. But you can also note that there's one state on the map that pops out quite a bit more than others, with a whopping 12,000 stations. And so while they have a significant amount more population, we're also looking at how readily available are these types of options for people today. MAP is actively working on a project with the state of Nebraska and the Nebraska Clean Energy Alliance with the city of Omaha to implement an expansion of EV infrastructure in the Omaha metro here in the next year or two. And part of that is the designation of I-80 through Iowa and Nebraska as an alternative fuel corridor. One of those alternative fuels being electric vehicles. Its charging infrastructure goes along with that, in addition to US 6, so Dodge Street, West Broadway corridor, and Township Bluffs as well. So there will be more to come on that, but this is an area where we see tremendous growth, and there's a good reason for it. When we look at sort of the energy efficiency of different types of personal automobiles, and whether it's a gasoline vehicle, diesel vehicle, or kind of fleet vehicles that might be powered by compressed natural gas, compared to electric vehicles, we can see that there's tremendous amounts of savings, both in cost and greenhouse gas emissions. And these greenhouse gases, regardless of whether you believe in climate change or not, there's significant impacts on our health as well. Nitrous, or oxides of nitrogen, I should say, are when matched with like volatile organic compounds, and those mix under right conditions, they create high levels of ground level ozone, which has tremendous effects on things like asthma rates, COPD, and other chronic diseases. So, just beyond kind of the realm of greenhouse gases, climate change, and what we can do to reduce those things, there's really a local issue of health as well. These are really highly local issues. But we can see that electric vehicles and alternative fuels such as compressed natural gas and EVs have lots of benefits in this area. And so those infrastructure investments that we're considering, that we're looking to continue over time, are really important to making sure that this is a choice for residents of our region and people traveling through. And so when we're talking about ground level ozone and air quality in general, what we would call mobile sources of emission, or vehicles, are the leading contributors in oxides of nitrogen and the largest non-organic source of volatile organic compounds. And like I mentioned before, the chemistry of air quality, those two things mixed together with sunlight and other things to create high levels of ozone, especially if there's inversion where there's warm or cold air on bottom and warm air on top, kind of traps that air down close to the ground. It can have tremendous impacts on people's health over time. So this is something that we closely monitor because in terms of the transportation planning process, and in terms of the amount of funding that we get and what we're allowed to spend that money on, what we would call attainment or staying below the national ambient air quality standards is a huge deal. In about 2010 or 2011, we were very close to what is now the new standard. But since that new standard was actually implemented back in 2015, we've been below, which is good. But mobile sources of these kinds of greenhouse gases are really important for us to consider as we go forward in terms of making sure that we do stay at attainment, because we lose a lot of local control about how we spend that money I talked about at the beginning. It becomes very difficult to demonstrate that a project is improving air quality. There's only certain things that you can do. And there you go. Those are the arrows that were pointing to the two things I wanted to highlight. Forgot that was there. So when we look at those kind of big three issues all together, we look at the corporate average fuel economy, we look at the travel patterns, we look at things like electric vehicles, and then we think about how transportation is funded. A lot of it is funded through a gas tax. So all of those issues kind of converge around consuming less gas, which is a good thing. But our current model for funding transportation is tremendously reliant on the gas tax, both at the federal and the local level, the state level, I should know. The federal gas tax hasn't been increased since 1993. The world's a different place since 1993. But as you can see, in the last few years, 2014 and 2015 especially, the Highway Trust Fund has not been solved. So there's had to be large transfers of money from kind of the general fund of the federal government to actually keep it afloat and to keep money flowing to communities for transportation projects. And so this isn't an issue far off down the line for us to be really considering. And this is money today. It's $52 billion in 2016 that had to be transferred just to pay for the obligations that the Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, and U.S. Department of Transportation had in general. And over time, our lack of investment in our infrastructure, particularly in the areas of roads, bridges, and transit that I've highlighted here, has kind of put us behind the eight ball, so to speak. And we have our infrastructure, we've fallen way behind other countries in terms of the condition of our infrastructure, how well we maintain it, and the transportation funding issue isn't really allowing us to catch up very quickly at all. And so our best efforts to improve sustainability, our best efforts to find more sustainable solutions for moving around, both in personal vehicles and really having choices about different vehicles, puts us in a bit of a bind. But there are options. So, Nebraska is one state here. If you own an electric vehicle, you pay, I think, a $75 fee, if I'm not mistaken, looking at the chart here, which if you multiply the average number of miles people drive, 12,000, times about the average amount of gas tax that you spend, it's almost identical. So it becomes a user fee for those users of the transportation system that wouldn't be consuming the gas tax. And this is really kind of a true user fee. A lot of states you can see are moving towards it. But even a more specific user fee is something that Oregon is doing, and I believe it's called Origo, if I'm not mistaken, or something along those lines, where they're actually allowing people to sign up and have a device put in their vehicle to track the number of miles that they travel in a year. And based on how much fuel tax that they would have spent traveling the same number of miles, they either get a rebate or are required to pay a certain amount. So looking here for an EV that wouldn't be consuming fuel but used the roadways quite a bit, they would be charged $9.72 a month for that basically right to use the roadway. Whereas a light-duty truck, that F-150 that you noted there, would actually get a rebate of $1.80 per month for you on the web right there as well. Because their actual contributions from fuel tax would have been greater than the kind of per mile charge. And so this, going forward, is probably a better model for us to think about how to fund transportation. The issue is that it raises a lot of concerns about Big Brother, Orwellian tracking where you're going and how far you're driving. But ultimately, this is more of a true user fee and would allow us to expand use of things like electric vehicles and other things that we know have tremendous benefits outside of transportation itself. So kind of shifting then the conversation from some of those areas of whether it's fuel economy or the actual transportation funding and how all those things impact. One thing that MAPA is really talking a lot about today is this notion of closing the gap. And really, from the Heartland 2050 initiative that I've highlighted a little bit before, and I'm going to talk about more, walkable communities connected by transportation options was pretty much the central thing we heard in all the work that we did. A lot of the conversations, even in areas of education and healthcare, came back to the amount of choice people have and how they move around the region. So this Close the Gap has really become kind of our signature effort in terms of really thinking about the types of investments we need to make as a community, the priorities that we need to be setting at the local level to really both address some of the issues that we know face today, but also make sure that we're competitive going forward in the future and that we're attracting and retaining talent here in the region. And so when we look at, kind of looking at that energy efficiency and the equivalency of the amount of energy that's in a gallon of gas compared to, the amount of energy that a person has to expend by walking, you can see that walking and biking are tremendously efficient ways of moving around, but they're not practical for 10, 12-mile trips for the average person. And so how do we start to think about maximizing and optimizing those trips for people, to right-size the right type of trip for the right type of road. And you'll note that that should be 6 miles per gallon, by the way, for the bus. I guess it wasn't updated there. But if you look then at the number of buses, even with 30 passengers on the bus, you can see that, there's a difference between a bus getting 6 miles per gallon and carrying 30 people than a car with an average of about, I think, 1.3 people, which is optimistic, I would say, in the Omaha Metro. That is only kind of an equivalency of 39 miles per gallon. So, trains for shorter trips, walking and biking, we really should be encouraging as communities in terms of energy conservation and efficiency. And then for some of those longer trips, we should be looking to transit first and really seeing how we can connect these walkable communities with transportation options like transit and really making sure that we're developing, or I should say redeveloping old areas of our community and developing new areas of our community to allow for these types of transportation choices. We don't want everybody to be stuck in traffic in perpetuity. So where do we stand as a community? If you haven't checked out the Omaha Community Foundation's Landscape Project, I really encourage you to do so. It's a fantastic website, and I've just stolen some of their great infographics for the use in my presentation today. But you'll note that in the Omaha Metro, 83% of people today drive alone, and that is above the national average. And so, even just to get down to where even some of our peer communities are in areas around the country, some of the places that we're really competing with in terms of talent and even corporate investment, we have some work to do. Currently 2% of individuals walk to work. That doesn't mean that's the total number of trips done by walking. Obviously, there's lots of non-work trips. Unfortunately, our data is a lot about commuting. But this is one way to think about it. And in terms of bike friendliness, you can see that Omaha is ranked 27th for major metros, for the top largest 100 metros in terms of bike investment. But communities like Minneapolis and Denver and other peers like even Nashville are much higher on that list than we are. And so what's going on that we can see how some of these trips are really being made together throughout the region. So we look at the number of bikes that are loaded on Metro buses since 2008 when they first put bike racks on the buses. You can see there's tremendous year-over-year growth. Additionally, with programs such as the Heartland Bike Share that was started right here around UNO's campus, we can see that there's been growth in both ridership and the number of users, and we put the annual subscribers in there too. It's also an upward trend as well. And so there's a lot of things to point to that show that we're heading in the right direction in terms of addressing some of these kind of banner numbers. And I'd also note that the Heartland Bike Share program is going to be expanding, almost doubling over the next several years as well. And so as that system becomes more convenient for people, it's available in more places around the community. Right now it's kind of isolated generally on 2 islands, one around UNO and one kind of around downtown. But as we start to connect that to some of the older neighborhoods, whether it's more connections around Dundee and other things, Blackstone District, other places, we can see some of those trips be enabled where if somebody's going a mile or two, maybe it's easier to take a bike than it is to get in their car and go to lunch. And those are really the kinds of opportunities that we look at to really change some of these statistics and really make us a friendlier place for these types of choices. And we know that there's a fair bit of cycling going on in our region today. This is the output of one app, Strava. If you can orient yourself, there's downtown Omaha right here, west end of Council Bluffs, downtown Council Bluffs over there. The red means higher levels of activity, more cycling trips logged. So this is people who have opted into an app. It's a small sample, but even with this small sample, we can see that in all parts of our region, even in the rural parts of our region, that cycling is going on. So we, as public agencies, as people interested in energy efficiency, as you all are by showing up here today, and energy conservation, what can we do to make those kinds of trips safe? It's kind of the mantra of what you may have heard termed as complete streets, making sure that transportation trips, transportation systems are safe for all users, whether that's walking, biking, transit users, or cars. And we've made tremendous investments in our community in the bikeability of our region. The Bob Terry Pedestrian Bridge is a world-class facility that connects our two communities. And there are more large investments coming down the pike as well. So just outside UNO's campus here today at 60th and Dodge, in a couple of years, there will be a bus rapid transit station that will be fast, frequent, kind of premium transit service. The way to think about it is kind of rail on wheels in terms of the type of service that it provides. It stops less frequently than your average bus, but it also provides a much quicker service from West Roads all the way to downtown. So this is going to be a huge project. It's a $30 million project that's going in kind of on the most busy corridor in central Omaha. And we're really looking at some really big opportunities for looking at how we develop our communities around these stations, how we really maximize the impact of that investment to ensure that people are able to live and work and do their daily needs in and around this system. So it's kind of the spine of our city. This is really the best place to start. It's the most productive would be the transit word, but the busiest transit route in the community today, and we anticipate growth in that ridership with this investment as well. So this is a big project, opening late 2018, right, Jason? I got a thumbs up. So when we're thinking about safety in terms of cyclists, there's kind of this useful term that we use, or kind of this way of thinking about it, in terms of using it for transportation, kind of using your daily needs or going from work or whatever else it might be. So it's something that came out of Portland, but has been actually verified all around the country in terms of like phone surveys and other things that are done at the local level. There's really 4 types of transportation cyclists, and this is kind of a way of thinking about the types of investments we need to be making in our community. There's the people over at this end of the spectrum who are going to ride basically no matter what. Even the enthused and confident people, they might be more interested in riding when there's infrastructure available, like a bike lane, but they're willing to ride on facilities that don't need that. But you'll see that, or don't have that, excuse me. But you'll see that in general, the vast majority of the population might be interested in cycling. Maybe it's a 1-mile trip or a 2-mile trip or just going to the neighborhood store, but they're concerned. And those concerns we know from talking to people and doing some survey work are oriented around safety. And so when we look at some of that survey data, when we ask people how safe they feel on bike trails, 93% of people say that they feel safe or very safe. These colors are kind of strange. I apologize for that. When we asked about streets with bike lanes, you can see that the actual safe or very safe number goes down to about 40%, 37%. And when we look at streets without bike lanes, it's almost inverse of the bike trails. So what's so special about bike trails that makes them so attractive to people, even people who probably don't ride their bike all that much? The only screening question we asked on this set of questions was, have you ridden your bike in the last year? So that's what we asked them. So these might be people who have gone out recreationally in the past. But I think one of the important takeaways here is when we're going back and thinking about that interested and concerned category, this 37% number looks a lot like that 40% number in terms of the type of people, or the 60% people not very safe, I should say. Looks a lot like the people who may be in our community who are concerned about the safety of transportation modes outside of maybe getting in their car and doing their daily needs. And so as a planner, as somebody who kind of focuses on the type of investments that communities make, safety has to be front and center in the types of facilities. It can't just be the bike lane that we put up there in the past. We really have to think about making sure that people do feel safe, and there's lots of examples from around the nation and around the world to really point to. So back to this idea of what makes communities attractive and why these options matter outside of the context of just transportation for itself. We know from looking at census statistics, from talking to employers, that we're losing a tremendous amount of high-skill talent in our region. $2,300 people a year was the latest estimate back in December 2016 World Herald article. And when we start to look at the two largest generations, millennials and baby boomers, in terms of the population, we can see that there's actually kind of convergence around these ideas of walkable communities. As baby boomers age, they want to be less reliant on cars, similar to millennials who have very different travel patterns and make different housing choices than a lot of previous generations have. This survey done in 2014 shows that, of the people asked, 65% of people felt that investing in schools, transportation choices, and walkable areas was better than kind of traditional business retention and attraction in terms of economic growth. And 49%, half of the people said that they wanted to live in these types of communities where there are transportation options, and only 7% wanted to live somewhere where they had to drive most places. And so this is kind of a paradigm shift, I would say, in terms of how people think about moving about their communities. And in communities like Omaha, there's significant challenges in terms of the way we've developed over the last 40 to 50 years, and really providing these options, both housing and transportation options for people. And to that point, let's talk a little bit about Heartland 2050. It's a nice slide, nice segue. So Heartland 2050 was something that we started back in 2011, but really we did a lot of community visioning work back in 2012 and 2013, had a lot of workshops where we gathered input from people about what their priorities were in a whole bunch of different areas, including education, housing, economic development, infrastructure, and a whole host of natural resources was another big one. And really trying to figure out how we wanted to grow as a region, and looking at what we know about how we've grown in the past, looking at where that might take us, and really making some tough choices about the types of priorities that we should be setting as a community. And so after we did the workshops, after we kind of collected a lot of input, we posed 4 scenarios to the community. So the first one here, it's a little bit difficult to see, but this is Douglas and Sarpy County. As you can see, kind of the borders here, under what we would call the trend scenario, the just kind of growth scenario, projecting out the last 40 years into the future, we can see that we basically fill up all of Douglas and Sarpy County with development, and there'd be a lot of growth around Potawatomi County as well. In B, this scenario was actually the workshop input. So when we went out to those communities and we allowed them to put on the maps where they thought different types of development should happen, this is kind of the average of all of those workshops together. In C, we really consolidated a lot of the growth into the urban core. And in D, we distributed a lot of the growth around to some of the smaller communities, but focused it around kind of neighborhoods and town centers. So in Sarpy County, you might see some more higher levels of density kind of in a town center area, or even out in Harrison County and Mills County and some of the existing smaller communities there. And what we were able to do with these scenarios is really compare the benefits and burdens of these in terms of transportation and transportation investments. We know that continuing to do the same thing that we've done for the last 40 years is unsustainable. We can't afford the infrastructure that we've built over the last 40 years. So if we continue to invest that way, we're either going to have to pay a lot more, or we're going to have to change how we think about it and really come up with a more sustainable path forward. The 2 scenarios that were ranked almost identically in terms of the public's input on this were C and D, so kind of this urban strategy and this distributed strategy. And so when we kind of looked at those 2 things together and really what were the priorities of those, we can see that there's a high walkability in these places. There's a high walkability with this kind of development pattern. Access to jobs is increased over what we would see both today, and if we continue to, in terms of transit access, it's easier to provide transit to jobs than where employment will be within the 30-minute time frame. And then there's convenient daily destinations for people to walk or even to drive within 10 minutes. So based on whatever mode that they choose, they can get there in 10 minutes. And you can see that in the D scenario, that increase went off the chart because we're providing a lot of those options in some of those smaller communities as well. And so what we saw here is that there's this clear ethos, as I kind of referenced earlier, that people want these choices, even here in the Omaha metro. And so we've got to make some decisions about how we're developing and really looking at what the impact on both our ability to provide high quality transit and other transportation options is, based on the way that we've grown in the past and the way that we continue to grow and are planning to grow in the future. And so the final scenario you can see here in terms of where and how we would plan to grow. It's a little bit different map here, but you can see that a lot of it, we anticipate growing. The hatched areas are places that are actually already developed, but not within communities. The SID model, if you're familiar with that, here in Nebraska. But as you can see, it's much more consolidated growth than under either scenario A or even the workshop input. And so this is kind of our vision, and this is really what we use in the transportation planning process. We're saying when we're measuring transportation projects against what we anticipate being our future development, this is the land use that we're using. This is the assumption of what we think makes the most sense in terms of how our community should develop and how those transportation systems can be best provided. So things like transit, things like bike-way projects, do better in this type of environment where those environments are or where the development kind of matches a lot of that. The development matches our ability to actually provide those types of transportation options. And so now I've kind of come full circle. I've gone through Heartland 2015, talked a little bit about fuel efficiency, and the question, as I mentioned, highlighted at the beginning, that I hear almost daily now is, what are autonomous vehicles really going to do for communities? And what I can say with great authority is that we don't know. But there's a lot that we know from the past that we can really use to kind of at least get a sense of where we might be going and some of the issues that we might face with autonomous vehicles, and even with the benefits that we anticipate from them. So if you're not familiar, autonomous vehicles are a car loaded up with sensors so that it knows everything that's going on around it. It's connected to the internet. It knows basically what it should be anticipating up ahead of it, but it can also sense the vehicles around it, the roadway around it. It knows where it's supposed to be. And one of the banner benefits of this type of technology is really the safety. 90% of traffic or fatal traffic accidents are human error. So whether that's not using your seatbelt, distracted driving, drunk driving, all of these things that really contribute to fatal crashes are largely our fault as drivers, irresponsible drivers, not any of you. But autonomous vehicles really pose a great solution to that in terms of taking that decision making out of people's hands and really making it so that the car can anticipate things in a way that really humans can't. And so, when we think about what we actually mean by automated, I'm not going to bore you with all of this, but you can see here kind of the key point is that, what the human is responsible for versus what the vehicle is responsible for. As we go down this list, the vehicle becomes responsible for more of the things, really monitoring what's going on around it, and really having control of how the vehicle moves around. When you get to level 4 and level 5, the vehicle doesn't even really need a steering wheel. And so when you hear about the Ford concept cars that don't have a steering wheel that they're building for Uber, they're going to be on the roads by 2020 or 2021, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about this level 5 full automation. The current Tesla models, if I can find my mouse, are right about here, where the drivers were still responsible for being ready to take the wheel if necessary, but for the most part, the car can drive itself under most conditions. So as I noted, the safety benefits of this are tremendous. But in terms of what we think about in terms of transportation planning, this is my worst slide, I apologize, but this data isn't available in a good format. Some of the key issues that we're looking at really facing is well, how soon are people going to have autonomous vehicles? We can look at the past and we can see how fast different technologies like seatbelts or airbags and other things that where other safety features of vehicles were adopted, many of them by federal mandate, to kind of get a sense of the projection. And that's really what this top chart is showing. There's lots of people who have come up with different projections, and there's a wide range. But if you look out to about 2040 or 2050, you can see the range is from about 20% to 90% in terms of adoption. Well, that's a big range in terms of what we might say is a conservative estimate versus a more aggressive estimate. But when we look at modeling things, which we do quite a bit in transportation, and really trying to figure out when we get the benefits of autonomous vehicles, because if there's just 10 autonomous vehicles on the road, and they're accounting for all that human error still out there, they can't really, get closer to other vehicles or kind of move through intersections faster, or you may have heard of truck platooning, where it looks like, there might be a driver in the first truck, but then there's 6 other trucks behind it that allow it to look more like a train on a highway. Those things can happen, but they can't happen when there's a lot of other human drivers. So you can see that the benefits of autonomous vehicles really come in when there's about 70 or 80% market penetration, and 70 or 80% of people are actually using it. That's when we just kind of start realizing the benefits. That's not even the full benefits. And so I guess my thesis of all this would be we're going to have to wait a while. And, technology is not likely to kind of help us get out of this all on its own because there's just some big issues with autonomous and connected vehicles generally. Where do all the cars go? If the idea is that this car brings us to a place and drops us off, well, where does the car go next? Is it going to just go drive around for the next passenger? Will it be kind of the ride-sharing model of Uber or other things that we've seen take hold in the last few years? Or will it go park in some suburban location and then come back, maybe downtown or to another urban center in the future? Well, if it's doing that, that's a lot of extra miles that it's driving rather than just parking your car in one place. And how do we account for that traffic growth in terms of, just what we would call deadheading, an empty car driving around? A lot of, the people who think about this think that, with the value of your time being in the car being less, you might want to do other things. Kind of, you think about taking a train trip or a transit trip, that you can do other things while you're driving. That people might want to drive more or take longer trips. Well, that has huge impacts on how we develop. If people are wanting to live farther away, from their job or their other locations, it kind of goes against this idea of walkable communities and having things that you might need on a daily basis close to. And then finally, can we really, with autonomous vehicles and really relying on autonomous vehicles, really realize a lot of the benefits that I talked about through the rest of this presentation? Can we really have all the benefits of things like walking and biking for some of those daily trips, getting cars off the road, really having more compact development that supports all of those things, and housing choices and other things? With these other 2 points, it seems that it would be difficult unless something changes about how cars are shaped and how much space they take up. Are we saving questions till the end?
Saving questions till the end.
Sorry, Dan. You'll have to wait. There's only one more slide. And so there's still a lot of questions out here, but we're looking at this today. We don't really anticipate having, any big revelations here for another 5 or so years when cars are actually on the road. We can see, okay, well, how quickly are they being adopted? But, part of the planning, part of thinking about these things is that we're kind of going to routinely check in on this and really monitor it to see if we need to be investing in things differently. And so kind of, just to summarize, some of the high-level points of what we've talked about today, our efforts to be more sustainable, to, have higher fuel efficiency, to use electric vehicles, have really shaken up the transportation funding model, combined with people just driving less in terms of, not just during the recession. A lot of times people say, well, economic activity is a large driver of traffic, but even after the recession, in many regions, Omaha has ticked up a little bit, but around the country, many regions have seen their traffic volumes stay flat or go down, even 6-7 years after kind of the recession was over. And we know that we can see the benefits of transit-oriented development, walkable communities, that they go well beyond what just gets built that day, that they provide choices for people in ways that auto-oriented development just doesn't do. We can see examples of that throughout our region. We can see examples of that throughout the country. And so, those benefits are really an investment. So I think as a communities, as somebody who's kind of involved in the planning process, we really have a responsibility to talk about that and really say, just as infrastructure is an investment, so is the way that we develop. And while, technology will give us, a few maybe specific opportunities to really change some of the risk factors, whether it's safety or in terms of some of those intelligent transportation systems that will allow us to get more out of our roadways, it's not going to be the answer. In the same way that we couldn't build our way out of congestion, technology is not going to allow us to kind of build our way to sustainability on its own. There's these other factors like land use, where we live, how long the trips we're taking that are really bigger drivers of that. And especially if we're thinking about it through the lens of energy conservation, in terms of having some of those trips be available to people by walking or biking, or even longer trips by transit. There's huge benefits in all of that. And really, as kind of a model for thinking about how we grow into the future, the benefits go well beyond what we see with other choices and other types of development. So with that, thank you very much.
All right, we'll open it up to questions, and we will pass this catch box off to you, and you should speak into the black part, and here we go. So, question back here. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Wow. So you talked about the impact that autonomous vehicles might have in terms of congestion reduction, but maybe it would add more. I've heard stats that for every one autonomous shared vehicle, you can reduce
Mhm.
I also saw a report by RMI that predicted peak car by 2020, just looking at the trends of people buying cars, and people are buying fewer and fewer cars, especially as the younger generation has choices like Uber and things like that, and walkable communities. So the multi-billion-dollar question is, you think penetration might be in 2040 for electric vehicle or autonomous vehicles based on those projections at a decent level. The infrastructure that we're spending billions of dollars on today to widen roads, to make interstates bigger, to take up more land in West Omaha, are these going to be stranded assets? And how are we thinking about preparing our infrastructure to make it through the next maybe 5 or 10 years? Maybe even forget autonomous cars. We've got Uber and Lyft, which is going to reduce the number of cars on the road per person. So are we just going to keep spending money like we've always done it because there's a lot of money to be made in the road construction business? Or are we, as planners and community members, really thinking about what if we spend some of that money investing in other transportation infrastructure, such as widening roads, to hit this tiny little bubble of capacity? I mean, your long-range transportation plan is usually projects are lined up for what, 10 years? 20 years. So that plan is obsolete, I would argue, at least for the second half.
That's why we're updating it. No, but that's a really good question. In terms of transportation investment, I would say that because, communities around the country don't know, a lot of what they're doing is they're doing one of two things. They're doing status quo, where they're saying, well, these maybe capacity needs, roadway widening needs have existed for a long time. So we're going to continue to invest in that to, address the issue today. Because, whether or not it's obsolete, you can look at it a few different ways. If an autonomous vehicle is able to, maybe drive a lot closer to another vehicle, having that roadway there might provide like an actual space for autonomous vehicles. There's concepts out there like managed lanes, like you might think of high occupancy vehicle lanes. Well, maybe there's an autonomous lane. Maybe it's much narrower and fits within kind of the existing footprint of a roadway. After we add that capacity, there's things like that we look at. In terms of obsolete and whether that kind of model has already played itself out, I think most communities that are kind of thinking in terms of quality of life, in terms of transportation investments, and really trying to maximize the value of their communities have already largely moved past that in terms of saying, we know we can't build our way out of congestion. We try, but for every lane that we add over a certain point, we only get maybe a quarter of a lane of benefit or even a third of a lane of benefit in kind of best case scenario. But in terms of what is it obsolete? I mean, it's kind of obsolete before the question of autonomous vehicles in my mind. But I mean, certainly I think, there's benefits today, which is probably what's going to drive decision making. But in terms of autonomous vehicles taking vehicles off the road, I think probably the biggest opportunity is looking at industries like freight and transit, where the majority of the cost of doing that is labor cost. I think locally here, it's about 70 to 75% of the cost of operating the transit system here is wages. And so if we are able to take the person out of that, and autonomous transit becomes readily available, we're going to have a lot more funding to actually provide that service to more places, provide that service more frequently to the places that work great for transit, that are designed around transit. And maybe that's a game changer in and of itself. And so maybe the ride-hailing services like Uber and Lyft and other things are a supplement to that. We just don't know. All this stuff is so new, but there's a lot of big questions out there. I think you nailed the field. We're not probably going to stop today building roads.
So there's no time horizon for Omaha to say we're going to stop widening roads because we know it's going to be not necessary. And shifting those dollars to invest in autonomous buses.
Not yet. Well, autonomous buses don't exist yet. So.
Not yet.
Yeah, we're good. We'll get there.
They do before trains.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we have a mayoral race coming up in Omaha, and one of the candidates has been sharing the Heart of 2050 plans for expanding public transportation. So without making me endorse one of the candidates or anything like that. So could we just say that it would be important to get involved in local politics on that level because these things are on the local level?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the mayoral race in general, I think infrastructure and transit investment have really risen to the top as two issues that both candidates are saying these have tremendous benefits. The time is right. Let's go. There are different proposals about how to do that. Mayor Stothard has kind of been a member of our executive committee, actually on our board in terms of MAPA. And so she's involved in Heartland 2015 Close the Gap. And that's why you're seeing a lot of it out there today. But I think in terms of the time being right for transit in our community, we're hearing about it in so many contexts through Heartland 2050. We're seeing partners such as like the Chamber of Commerce that we just never really heard have an issue or an interest in transit, really kind of seeing the economic benefits of it. And so I think, always get involved in local elections. I would say that even if it didn't benefit me directly. But I think you're right in kind of picking up on, the conversation has really changed here in our community around transit. You just haven't heard this type of interest, energy level around things like the BRT, around things like the streetcar proposal, and around things like kind of the larger vision for what a regional transit system might be.
Well, 4 years ago, the bike ped coordinator was eliminated
Mm-hmm.
credit. So the fact that people are talking about it in a more holistic way means things have changed.
So it sounds like there's some inevitability. There might be somewhere interest from one way or another in choices you have to guide it.
Yeah, and there's some big choices, and a lot of those choices are going to be made by the community in the future about what the priorities are, and really how we're going to pay for them. Because if you missed the first third of my presentation, kind of the traditional model for transportation funding is pretty broken, and so it's going to be a local initiative, and that's really what you're seeing. Kind of the regions that are doing this well. It noted that Anthony Fox called Omaha the next Los Angeles. Well, he said that before they passed Measure M and agreed to tax themselves to spend $150 billion on transit. So maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing to be Los Angeles now.
I'd like to comment on the politics, I suppose, not in a political way, but just how important it is to be visionary, because all of this is so complicated and interrelated. So you mentioned towards the end, it isn't just the transportation, it's the land development that allows us to even have the transportation that we'd like to have, whether it works or not.
Yeah.
So that's a huge thing in terms of looking ahead and seeing what the vision is. Question I had was whether or not, in the work you've done, is there a city that if we were to say this is what we want to aspire to be, because I oftentimes have people tell me that this is the way we do things here at this class. And so, whether it's traffic circles, whatever it happens to be. So, is there a city that is ahead of us? All of us are changing dramatically, especially with the new vehicles. But is there a city that seems like would be the scale or to the believability of what Omaha might look like in 20 years?
Yeah, if you're looking for examples of conservative communities who have said, hey, transit's a priority for tons of reasons. You can look at Salt Lake City. That's kind of a community that through our Heartland 2050 effort, we've really looked up to, because they kind of modeled this regional visioning process for a lot of other metro areas. And ultimately, the community, what they desired to really maintain their air quality on the Wasatch Front was transit. And they did a 30-year plan in 10 years because the community was willing to pay for it. They got their first line and they said, well, we want all of this now. But there's other examples recently too. You can look at Kansas City and the way that they've been investing in both the streetcar and other transit service around their community. But also, I think kind of another community that you might not think of as like a transit city, it's really been investing a lot in bike infrastructure and transit, is Oklahoma City. And it's a transformational change in downtown OKC. If you look at the types of investment that they're making, and a community probably much more conservative than Omaha. But the way that they did that was really having this vision for what they wanted the community to be, and really oriented around not just the transportation in and of itself, but around the community health. Having options for people to live active lifestyles in downtown, to be able to walk where they wanted to go, to meet their daily needs, and to get around the community by cycling or to walk to transit. And it's been a tremendous change for them, and it's happened pretty quickly. So, there's lots of examples. You can point to Portland as an aspirational city. It's about the same size as Omaha in some ways, in some places. But I think, in terms of believability, I think those three examples are probably the best.
But you also think we're past the point where we're doing this just because we're going to have to pay a lot of fines if we don't?
there's no fines associated with this, no.
No, but I mean, what I heard in the past was if we don't get our act together with transportation when the air quality is.
Oh, sure.
Air fine, we need to be on top of that.
Yeah.
I think this is the carrot or the stick. It sounds like we're starting to get more carrotless.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So the air quality information that I highlighted, we go back to that. I didn't include the kind of where we stand in terms of the standard chart here. So this is kind of the way, the breakdown of the different sources of, two what we call criteria pollutants in Douglas County. But in terms of where we stand for ozone, in terms of the national ambient air quality standards, back in I think 2010 or 2011, we were getting really close to what was being proposed then as a new air quality standard. Ultimately, the standard wasn't 65 parts per million. It ended up being 70, which is a threshold that we never really met. We got really close, but when it was 65, we had a few years there as that was being considered, where as a region we were over. And you're absolutely right, there are fines associated with non-attainment, and it's something that we really, 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 really want to avoid. What for not only the economic impact, but we lose a lot of autonomy in terms of our transportation decision making, in terms of that funding that we get, in terms of a lot of other funding that the states get, and how that has to be invested. So that stick was looming for a long time. You may have heard of our Little Steps Big Impact program, where we kind of talk about air quality and some of the little steps that you can take to improve air quality. And that was really kind of born out of that, that concern about that standard. With the new standard and how we've been performing over the last couple of years, it's not really kind of looming over us right now. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do something, because as you can see, the mobile sources of these two pollutants in particular are among the largest in terms of what we should be concerned about in terms of ground level ozone. So, yeah.
Olivia, do you have any questions?
I have two.
Okay.
And we have about 3 minutes, so I will
I'll be
give
brief.
Yes. Okay, so the first one is, how do you see ride-sharing and or autonomous vehicles impacting public transportation ridership? Do you consider the sharing economy and potential future in your plans?
Yeah, so I think we talked about that a little bit in previous questions. I think, the opportunity for transit is really centered around, if we can automate transit in a way that reduces the labor costs, we're going to be able to provide it in a traditional way to communities, in a much more frequency-based model. So like we'll be able to have the bus come more often, so that people aren't as, inconvenienced by it, let's say. In terms of ride sharing and ride hailing services, the path that a lot of those companies have talked about going is not necessarily just being, point A to point B, trips in a car to one place or another, but really packaging trips and really finding the best way of getting people somewhere. So in some communities, that might be taking somebody in an Uber vehicle all the way to like a light rail station, and then saying, okay, I can go pick up another passenger, get another fare, and there we know that they're going to be able to get to their destination. So really packaging those trips and really serving less as traditionally we call them ride sharing or ride hailing services, but more of a mobility company, and really getting people to where they need to go regardless of the mode, and really packaging those trips. There's a lot of concern about whether autonomous vehicles or those types of services make transit obsolete. I don't think so, because I think we see the benefits of transit in the way that we can orient our development to it that go well beyond that.
Thank you. And then the last one is, other than the bus rapid transit in Omaha, are there plans for light rail into the surrounding suburbs and eventually to Lincoln being planned as well?
Yeah, so there was an NTRAC study about 10 years ago now that looked at the feasibility of commuter rail between Omaha and Lincoln, and at that time it wasn't cost effective. Maybe that changed. There's some talk, I think, every year at the legislature about refunding that, funding that study again as an update. In terms of light rail, when I talked about the streetcar project a little bit, if you look at communities like Tucson, the technology, the actual vehicle of light rail is really converging around the same vehicle as streetcar. So in Tucson, all that the distinction between a streetcar and light rail is just that it stops less frequently in the suburbs. So it's the same vehicle. And so by investing in a streetcar, as we've heard a lot about in recent months here in Omaha, thinking about the future expansion of that line to stop less frequently, kind of out in the suburbs, is a real opportunity. what corridor that would be or where that would be is really to be figured out. But I think there are opportunities with that kind of core investment in the streetcar system in the downtown to midtown area.
Okay.
So yeah.
Thank you.
So
that is all the questions we have. So thank you very much for presenting today.
great, thank you.
And then our next presentation will be from Central Community College on April 6th, and it'll be on information technology. So thank you again. Thank you to the Center for Urban Sustainability, and thank you to all of our viewers for attending.
Thank you, Olivia.
Thanks.
Thank you.